So our last panelist today is Dr. Jaideep Gogtay, who is the Chief Medical Director at Cipla in India, one of the major generic manufacturers. And the question for him really is for him to discuss is the role of generic companies in addressing neglected diseases. Jaideep.
So I think some of the expertise that generic companies can bring to the table is in chemistry. And when I say chemistry, I don't mean medicinal chemistry, but actually organic chemistry. The synthesis of drugs, which can be hastened by generic companies. There is strong expertise in chemistry in these companies. In addition, there can be more inexpensive ways, more cost-efficient ways can be developed. And particularly coming from India, because India has been reverse engineering drugs from 1972. So for the last 30 or 40 years, India has been doing that, and that's why I think that's where generic companies can play a significant role. I think the second place where they can play a role is formulation development. If you look at generic companies, they would have like 500 products worldwide. For example, Cipla has nearly 2,000 products worldwide. So that shows the expertise in different kind of formulations, whether it is for adult formulations, for pediatric formulations that we were talking about earlier, for all kinds of formulations. And I think that's the second area of expertise that generic companies can bring about. The third is combinations. Coming from the background that I have been working in, is that when drugs were patented by 3 different companies, it was in India that you could actually put 3 drugs together belonging to 3 different companies and make a product like Trimune, which really was the beginning of the entire revolution that we have seen in HIV treatment. And that's how today 10 million people are actually on treatment. In the same breath, going on from Trimune to the pediatric formulation of Trimune. And that was a unique, I think, opportunity that Cipla had, that it actually worked for the first time. A generic company worked with the Medical Research Council in the UK with funding from the EDCTP. So it was a very unique collaboration. I think other examples of these are also the collaboration that we had with DNDi on the development of the ASMQ formulation, which DNDi brought from Brazil to this part of the world and came to Cipla, whether Cipla could develop it. And in fact, we could fine-tune it a little bit and actually get approval in the in India, and awaiting or expecting approval in several other countries in Asia. So I think there are many, many areas in which a generic company can bring their expertise and their strengths sometimes in emerging markets, which sometimes the innovative pharma companies may not have, can actually be made good use of to get products on the market.
Thanks a lot. So what incentives can we provide to quality generic manufacturers such as Cipla to get involved in neglected diseases as opposed to for profit?
So I think the way generic companies can get more incentivized is to perhaps collaborate with them earlier than what we were traditionally doing. Traditionally, when the drug was known, etc., that people came to us, can you make this for us, or can you? Perhaps generic companies would also like to move up the value chain and look at co-development. It could be co-development with people like DNDi who bring drugs from different people. They could bring, as I think you rightly used the word, catalysts, to bring different groups together. Perhaps in future, generic companies could work with innovative pharma companies. There is to some strength in innovative companies of drug discovery, medicinal chemistry, etc., which we don't possess. But we have other things that we can bring to the table. And perhaps in the area of neglected diseases, and I think you were rightly talking about an ecosystem. So if you include in the ecosystem innovative pharma companies, generic pharma companies, not-for-profit organizations, regulatory agencies, and perhaps investigators, and perhaps one group we didn't talk about is patient advocacy groups. If you put all these two together, I think you can really have a higher level of ecosystem than what is currently present for neglected disease. And I think generic companies could therefore be incentivized even further than what they're doing currently.
There are generic companies and generic companies. I think there are 400 different ACTs in Nigeria, and I suspect they're not all quite exactly the same in terms of quality. So how can we maintain quality in the generics industry?
Absolutely. That's a significant challenge that is there, and as you rightly pointed out, Nick, there are generic companies and there are generic companies. But I think the WHO pre-qualification program, which really ushered in the era of HIV drugs, was an important landmark that really made many companies realize that if you want to provide drugs, you've got to pass this hurdle. Or the PEPFAR program by the US government, which ensured that your drugs had to be tentatively approved by the US FDA. So I think these were 2 important landmarks. Coming from India, where there are 20,000 manufacturers, To ensure quality, I think it's first, as a company, what you do, what the company leadership really decides. It's a reputation that when you put your name on a label, you have to sustain, and that's critical. But I think at the same time, inspection by regulators. For example, the FDA has an office now in India. They've opened an office in Delhi and I think Mumbai as well, so they can inspect more often than what they would traditionally do earlier. So I think there are these ways, plus I think the regulatory guidelines in many of the developing countries are evolving quite rapidly. We see that when we go to countries for registration, whether it's in Africa or others, we are asked more questions than what we were, say, 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that will help. But at the same time, you're quite right that we didn't use the term counterfeit medicines or fake medicines, but this is a problem. And I think tougher laws, I know in India, we ourselves are often at the receiving end of counterfeit medicines, particularly in some of the northern states of India, where sometimes 15% of the drugs in the market of high-selling items could be actually fake or coming from somebody else, which is not yours. So I think a strong deterrence to these people, laws, punishments, all these factors together should be. There are ways of trying to tackle the counterfeiting strategy, but we were talking at lunch that even that could be broken by the people. So I think it should be actually in the interest of the generic companies themselves to realize that you have to maintain a quality and a certain standard.